evening. This is Ed Reed, Program Director with FairCount. I am also joined by Dr. Janine Abrams Mclean, who serves as Vice President at FairCount. You will hear from her in just a second. I hope that you and your family are safe and healthy during this time. We're delighted that voters from across the nation are joining us this evening for a robust discussion on the critical importance of participating in the 2020 election. FairCount is focused on increasing civic and voter participation nationally. Tonight's event is being presented by Black Men Count and Sisters for the Census, respectively. While the time may have passed to be counted in the 2020 census, our fight for a fair and accurate count is not yet over. We want to ensure that we are seen in the 2020 census and heard by casting our ballots in the 2020 election. Before we begin the conversation, I'd like to remind everyone that FairCount is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization, and as such does not advocate for the defeat, election, or re-election of any person from any political party. We have two dynamic speakers tonight that will have a conversation about the importance of voting and the pivotal role that voting plays in civic engagement. Tonight's conversation is an interactive conversation, so at any point during the conversation you would like to ask a question of our special guest, you can do so by pressing 9 on your phone. So if you're listening in at home tonight on your couch and you want to be a part of the interactive conversation, just press 9 on your phone to get in line to ask a question of one of our special guests. Again, you're on the line tonight live with a special telephone town hall about the importance of the 2020 election. So with that, I am going to turn it over to FairCount's Vice President, Dr. Janine Abrams Mclean.
Thank you, Ed, and good evening to everyone who's joining us tonight. I'm Dr. Janine Abrams Mclean, Vice President at FairCount. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I would like to get started by introducing our first special guest, Dr. Janetta B Cole. Her passion for the work of the National Council of Negro Women is centered on her long-standing engagement in the struggle for social justice, a struggle that must include full equality for African American women. She is a member of Delta Sigma Theta sorority, and she currently serves as a co-chair of the sorority's National Arts and Letters Commission. She is also a member of the Links Incorporated. Dr. Cole is a principal consultant with Cook Ross Incorporated, a consulting firm in Silver Spring, Maryland. She's a fellow of the American Anthropological Association and a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She is currently a senior consulting fellow at the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation. Dr. Cole serves as the president of both historically Black colleges for women in the United States, Spelman College and Bennett College, and this is a distinction that she alone holds. She also served as the director of the Smithsonian National Museum of African Art. She has authored and edited several books and numerous articles for scholarly and general audiences. She's received numerous awards, including an NCNW Uncommon Height Award and 68 honorary degrees. Dr. Cole, would you like to say hello to our listeners tonight?
I would be so full of joy to say good evening, my sisters, my brothers, my siblings all. You and I both know there are only days left before November 3rd, when at various times throughout our nation, the polls will close. The polls will close on an election in which voters will decide which way our country will go. Will there be a steady movement toward a more perfect union that's built on the belief that all women and men are created equal? Or will there be a retreat to practices born in the past, when systemic race and other forms of inequality have robbed African Americans and the marginalized communities of the promises that were made in the U.S. Constitution? Well, you and I both know each of you, you know, I know, that this is a year when we are voting, but it's a year that's been filled with losses that have disproportionately affected our African communities and other communities of color. The COVID-19 pandemic that's led to a disproportionate of our people losing their lives. And that has been a trigger to an economic pandemic. And then there's the pandemic of resurgency of old Jim Crow style racism. Well, those are losses. But you know what? There's something we simply cannot lose, and that is our determination to be in the struggle until we can finally say, free at last. Great God Almighty, free at last. Now, there's no magic that's going to get us there. There's no waving of some special wand that's going to dissolve 400 and more years of our being subjected to second-class citizenship. But I'll tell you this, we dare not fail to vote because there is not magic, but power in doing so. There's the power for us to determine who our political leaders will be. Because remember, it's these political leaders who can either institute positive changes that will improve the lives of Black women and men and children of all people, or they can decide to do little or nothing in the interest of all Americans. So join me, my sisters, my brothers, my siblings all, in not only exercising your right to vote, but doing all that you can to get many souls to the polls. And I just want to end with these words of our sister Oprah Winfrey. She said, for anybody who has an ancestor who didn't have the right to vote, you are dishonoring your family, disrespecting, disregarding their legacy, their suffering, and their dreams when you don't vote. So join me, all souls to the polls.
Woo! I tell you, Dr. Cole, when you started off like that, I could not wait for this conversation tonight. Thank you so much, Dr. Cole. We are so glad that you could join us. For those of you just joining the call, you are on a live telephone town hall conversation discussing voter participation and what it means for Black families across the nation. We want to hear your questions and concerns. So just press 9 to raise your hand to ask a question. I'm now going to turn it back over to our program director, Ed Reed.
Thank you so much, Janine. Turning now to introduce our next special guest, Dr. Gregory Vincent. Dr. Vincent is an acclaimed civil rights attorney and university professor and administrator. He previously served as Vice President of Diversity and Community Engagement at the University of Texas at Austin, where he also was a professor in the School of Law and in the Department of Higher Education Administration, where he also held the W.K. Kellogg Professorship in Community College Leadership. Vincent was named 2016 Educator of the Year by the University of Pennsylvania and received the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law Distinguished Service Award in 2012. Vincent served as the 48th Grand Sire Archon of Sigma Pi Phi Fraternity, also known as the Boule. He previously served as the 16th President of Hobart and William Smith College, his alma mater. He oversees research, teaching, and service efforts in the areas of educational equity, civil rights, and social justice. Dr. Vincent, would you like to say hello to our listeners tonight?
Brother Reed, first of all, I just want to thank you and Dr. Mclean for inviting me to join our national treasure, Dr. Janetta Cole, to discuss this such a critical topic. Dr. Cole has said it all, and I just want to make sure that we have time to interact with our listeners. And I just want to thank Fair Count for continuing to do outstanding work, both in making sure that every person is counted for the 2020 census, and to ensure that every person fully engages in the voting process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vincent. We're looking forward to a very robust conversation here tonight. And we're delighted that thousands of participants have already joined the call tonight. Some of them have even gotten in line to ask a question, to discuss the importance of voter participation across the nation. And so if you would like to get in line to ask a question, press 9 on your phone at any time. All you have to do is press 9. We want to ensure that this is a interactive conversation tonight. So I'm going to turn it back over to our Vice President, Dr. Abrams Mclean.
Yes. So as Ed said, all you have to do is press 9, and you can ask either one of our distinguished guests a question. But before we go to live questions, I'd like to ask a poll question. Each listener can answer by pressing a button on your phone, and we'll share the results in a couple of minutes. Please wait to hear all of the choices before you press the button. So our poll question is, what is your plan to vote in the 2020 election? Press 1 if you plan to vote absentee or by mail. Press 2 if you plan to vote on election day. Press 3 if you plan to vote early in person if your state offers it. And press 4 if you've already voted. So I'll say those again, and I'll give you a few more seconds to answer this question. Press 1, or what is your plan to vote in the 2020 election? Press 1, vote absentee or by mail. Press 2, vote on election day. Press 3, vote early in person if your state offers it, or press 4 if you've already voted. For those of you just joining this conversation with National Black Leaders, you can be a part of this discussion by pressing 9 on your phone. All right, so, and I apologize for the sound in the back. We're working on our end to account for that noise and to get the noise off, so please don't drop off. We're fixing it on the back end. And so from our poll, what we found is that out of, for that 21% of our listeners are planning to vote absentee or by mail. 27% are planning to vote on election day. 15% are planning to vote early or in person. And the majority of the largest percentage, not the majority, the largest percentage of our callers, 38%, have already voted. So I just want to ask Dr. Vincent, how do you feel about these results? So 20% have want to vote by mail or via absentee ballot. 27% want to vote on election day. 15% want to vote early or in person, and 38% of our listeners have already voted. What do you have to say about those results?
I think what we're witnessing is record numbers of early voting, and what that says to me is that voters want to be engaged and they want their vote to be counted. They want to ensure that this election really represents their collective will. So I'm not surprised that the largest group is persons who have already voted. I have, and all of my voting members of my family have already voted, so that affirms our actions.
Awesome. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Ed. Thank you, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's a really impressive number. So glad that folks have already made that plan to vote and got out and voted already. So that's great. We're so glad that thousands of you at home tonight, I know there are competing interests, but you are listening into the conversation, and we appreciate that. And we hope to maybe get some questions answered, talk a little bit about the critical importance of voter participation and what it means for Black families more specifically. We want to hear, again, your questions for the special guest, so press 9 on your phone to get in line to ask a question. I'm going to now kick it back to Dr. Abrams Mclean, who I think is going to bring Dr. Cole into the conversation with some discussion.
Yes. So this first question is for Dr. Cole. But first, I'd like to say, Dr. Cole, thank you for always being a friend to Fair Count. You were there for the launch of Sisters for the Census earlier this year you ensured that the National Council of Negro Women was a leading voice for the 2020 census. So let's talk about Black women and their involvement in civic engagement. You've had the opportunity to be mentored by and to work with some very powerful and influential Black women like Mary McLeod Bethune and Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. Throughout your career, you have fought for Black women. Why is this so personal to you? What drives you to continue in this struggle towards full equality? Dr. Cole? Oh. Well, I think we're having a little bit of, we might have to reconnect Dr. Cole. Ed, would you like to move on to the question, a question for Dr. Vincent while we wait for Dr. Cole?
Sure, happy to. So, Dr. Vincent, thanks again. You talked about sort of the partnership that you had with Fair Count, and under your leadership at Sigma Phi Phi fraternity, we were proud to work with the Boulay to ensure that Black men nationally were counted in the 2020 census, and that work was phenomenal, and I enjoyed being a close partner with you all. In fact, that partnership led to a national initiative. But tonight we're talking about another pillar of civic engagement, and that's voting. The arc of the moral universe bends towards justice, indeed, but the progress does ebb and flow. How do you and how can Black voters, more specifically Black men, stay motivated in times where progress has slowed or even taken a step back?
Yeah, and again, Brother Reed, I want to just thank you again for this work and for the founders, Stacey Abrams, and for Dr. Abrams Mclean, and all of you for doing this work. And you're right, because of this, we continue to work with our fraternities, our 5 fraternities. They have been involved and engaged, and again, it's thanks to your leadership. You mentioned a very important quote from Dr. King, and I wanted to introduce a second one. In February of 1968, just months before Dr. King's assassination, he said these words, and I quote, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." And so this was in the wake of the Vietnam War, just the real tensions in the country. We know how tumultuous 1968 was, but Dr. King was focused on hope while also recognizing the real challenges. And one of the things I often share in these presentations or with my students is that there have been very small slivers of time where Black people enjoyed full participation in our democratic society. We know there were 11 years of Reconstruction from roughly 1865 to 1876, where there was participation, which resulted in African Americans serving at the state and at the federal level. And then there was a significant backlash. We know that the 15th Amendment was ratified in 1870 that gave Black men the vote. So there's been 150 years, yet there were all kinds of oppressive tactics, domestic terrorism, white domestic terrorism, to take away the vote of Black people. We know that it was not until 1920 that women were given the right to vote via the 19th Amendment. But during that time, there was significant backlash. But it took very courageous people. And I want to emphasize, particularly for the young listeners on the call, that it took young people, people like Representative John Lewis, who engaged in this work. Dr. King was young during that time, and people like Fannie Lou Hamer and so many others who engaged in this very important work, which resulted in the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so, again, short of these very slivers of time, it was not until 1965 that we began to enjoy some level of participation. And even with that, there was efforts that have continued to this day to suppress the black vote. But with that, given that infinite hope, black people continued to participate and understood, as Dr. Cole mentioned, the profound importance of voting. And as a result of that, we saw this apex that resulted in a record participation in our election, so much so that in a very nefarious opinion, the Holder v. Shelby case in 2013, the majority stated that we've done so good, we don't need these protections anymore. And almost immediately after that, we saw some of the most restrictive laws to suppress the black vote. And so we see it, we understand it, and thanks to groups like Fair Count and advocacy organizations, we are fighting for the right to vote. Because as you mentioned, Fair Count is not a partisan group. What we all are committed to, and all the groups, whether it's Dr. Cole's leadership of the National Council of Negro Women, the Boulay, all the groups we work with, what we're advocating for is the permanent interest of black people and all people, because we understand that although we've fought for racial justice, that work inspired so many others. And when you think about the civil rights movement that was led by people like Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP, that inspired other movements. So, for example, Justice, then attorney, but Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg used that same legal strategy to fight for gender equality, environmental justice movement, and even persons with disabilities. And so our fight in LGBTQ rights, and so our fight for racial justice is support for all. And what we are looking for through the vote is full participation in our democratic society, and to make sure that the Constitution rings true for everyone. Again, what Dr. King mentioned, accepting finite disappointment while never giving up on infinite hope. So I wanted to just give a baseline, and again, I want to make sure we give time for our listeners to ask any questions.
That's awesome. I just love that. Just dropping that knowledge. I love it, and giving us that context, and looking at how that it brings great perspective here in 2020 to what's going on. Now, I want to follow up just a bit there, and just wondering, how can marginalized communities in the short and long terms overcome suppression tactics like shifting election dates, polling places shutting down under suspicious circumstances, and institutional assaults on voting methods that don't inherently favor voters of means, like mail-in voting?
Yeah. So one of the most important decisions I believe that was made in American history was the decision made by the NAACP and the lawyers for the NAACP, Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall, with all of the issues that were facing the black community. You had lynching, you had criminal justice issues, you had housing, employment, voting, of course. They focused on education because they understood that if we're ever going to change our country, persons have to be able to fully participate in our democratic society. And the best way to do that is to be educated and informed. And one of the most important rights of citizenship is the ability to vote, and we have to guard that and protect it and then use it. At the same time, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be informed and to engage and to be in communion and community with others to make sure that they understand. And so it's not just enough that you voted or people in your family. You have to reach out. And so that education and advocacy, not so much about who to vote for, to your earlier point, but about the issues. What are the issues facing the Black community? What we know is that there is real efforts, foreign efforts, to hurt and suppress our votes. We know that there are these restrictions, and so we have to be educated about it. We cannot fall for disinformation, and as citizens, we have an affirmative responsibility not just to vote, but to be informed on the issues from the top of the ballot all the way down to the local issues. There's a saying that all politics are local, and although there's a focus on the presidential election, so many things happen in your community. If we think about criminal justice reform, so many of those things happen at the local level. And so we just have to make sure we're informed, and education, advocacy, and action are the ways to address these issues that have been going on since the birth of our nation.
Thank you so much, and I couldn't agree with you more. As I just kind of take a look at what's been happening around us, and even the communities that we worked in Fair Count with the census, and some of the same things we're seeing in terms of disenfranchisement are happening around the election. So thank you so much for adding that context and insight there. I'm going to go back to Dr.
May
Abrams.
I make a point?
Yes, ma'am.
This is
Sure
Dr.
may.
Cole. I'm so sorry. I lost connectivity, but I am back, and I think I heard just about all of Dr. Gregory Vincent's incredible information and inspiration about why it is that we need to vote. I just wanted to add this one point, that, we no longer teach civics in our public schools. And so there's so much about the democratic process, so much about civic engagement, both of which are engines that should propel us to vote. And so it's through our fraternal and organizations, our sororities, our clubs, our churches, through our individual conversations, that we have to, in a sense, engage in self-education about this process so that we understand that direct connection between what it is we need and who it is we're voting for. Thank you for letting me insert that.
No, thank you, Dr. Cole. And I want, people have a lot of questions because they're not being taught civics. And so there is this lack of understanding about, how we can be civically engaged and what we should be doing in our communities. And so we want to hear your questions tonight for our special guest. So please press 9 on your phone to get in line to ask a question. So Dr. Cole, I'm going to go back to you. I just want to thank you again for being a friend to Fair Count. You were there for the launch of Sisters for the Census earlier this year, and you ensured that the National Council of Negro Women was a leading voice for the 2020 census. So let's talk about Black women and their involvement in civic engagement. You've had the opportunity to be mentored by and to work with some very powerful and influential Black women like Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune and Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. Throughout your career, you have fought for Black women. Why is this so personal to you? What drives you to continue in this struggle towards full equality?
Well, let me use words in responding to that, Dr. J. Words of the iconic leader, Dr. Dorothy Irene Height. She said, Black women don't often get to do what they want to do, but they always do what they have to do. And that, I think, in many ways summarizes this long 401-year-old struggle that we as Black women have been in. And as our good Dr. Vincent said, quoting Dr. King, We're not giving up hope. But this is a struggle that has placed us as victims of a double jeopardy of racism and sexism, systemic racism, systemic sexism. And yet, Black women historically, or if I could, historically, have been incredibly civic-minded. When we think about the struggle for voting, the right to vote, you know, we got to call names like Ella Baker and Fannie Lou Hamer. We got to go back as far as Sojourner Truth. We've got to remember Harriet Tubman. And surely we've got to remember Shirley Chisholm, who said, we've got to have a seat at the table. And if you don't have one, go find yourself a folding chair. And so Black women today are a demographic that consistently votes a lot more than other demographic groups. And so my sisters listening in to this very important conversation, you might say, well, then you're preaching to the choir if you're talking to Black women. Listen to me, my sisters. I'm not preaching to the choir. I'm asking you, the choir, to get other folks to sing with you. In other words, let us as Black women continue this tradition, not only of being souls to the polls ourselves, but making sure that everybody in our circle, our church, our beauty parlor, our sorority, our club, our alumni association, that everybody we know is as charged as we are to vote.
Yes, definitely. And we saw that with the census about people using their voices to get other people to get counted and being basically being trusted voices in their communities. And so, what messages, as a follow-up, what messages do you think are the most effective for making people understand the importance of voting and of being involved in leadership of a community?
Well, first of all, I do want to make sure to join with my brother, Dr. Vincent, in giving full recognition to the leadership of young people in our ongoing movement. In many ways, it's always been the case, going back to those days of the sit-ins, of SNCC, but look where young people are now, leading in so many ways the social justice movement. When we look at Black Lives Matter, that movement began by 4 young Black women. So I'm saying that to say that I think it's very helpful to tap in to what young people are thinking about, who they're listening to, what might inspire them to vote. And I'll tell you who's really inspiring me, and I ceased being young a long time ago. But a rapper whose name is Yellow Pain, who has this incredibly instructive way of saying to us through a rap, what is it that you want? Because if you want that, that's why you vote. And so, is it about student loans? Then voting is connected to that. Do you happen to be concerned about the environment? Voting is connected to that. Do you stand in absolute opposition to systemic racism and systemic sexism, to all forms of inequality? Well, voting is about that. And so I think we're all charged to find even better ways of making that connection between a dream that we have and an act, a simple act called voting that is connected to our dreams.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Cole. You are absolutely right on point with that. So I'm going to kick it over to Ed, and he's going to take our first question from our listeners.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's right. We're going to go now to your live questions. We do have a few of them. Our first question on the line tonight is going to be from Mr. Matthew Malone. Mr. Matthew Malone out of Mobile, Alabama. We are going to unmute you. So, Mr. Malone, you're live on the line if you would like to ask our special guest your question tonight.
Thank you, sir. How are you tonight? I'm doing good. I got a letter from the NAACP. I believe it was yesterday, and they gave me some names to call, and I'm going to call them and get them on the line. I mean, riled up to go vote if they are not already. And but one thing I want to ask, though, you all talking to, I heard that there's two black guys that's pretty influential to the black young men. Is this 50 Cent guy that, this rapper 50 Cent?
Mm-hmm.
Are you online?
Right, yeah.
Yes, tell me he's supporting Trump.
Well,
I wonder if he's educated.
Yeah, if I could respond
quickly
to Brother
go ahead, Dr.
Malone,
Cole, please.
It won't take me long. I just wanted to say thank you, because you know what? I got a list myself, because I'm a lifetime member of the NAACP, and I've been making my calls, and I'm going to continue to make our calls. Thank you, Brother Malone. That's how we get souls to the polls. So keep making those calls. Now, I'm going to turn it over to my brother colleague. Go ahead, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you, Dr. Cole, and I did as well receive the list. So thank you, Brother Malone. Let me just say that whereas it's wonderful to have celebrities give their views, it is our solemn responsibility to inform ourselves as to what is best for us and for our community. And one thing, Brother Malone, that I wanted to share, you mentioned NAACP. Of course, Dr. Cole leads another iconic organization. One of the things when we talk about the permanent interest of Black people and Black communities is that we have to support and invest in those organizations that have supported us for so many years. NCNW and, of course, NAACP are two of them, but it goes beyond that. The Black press, the fraternal and organizations, sororities, the Black church. Dr. Cole has led two of our amazing historically Black colleges and universities. So we have to go beyond that. And so whereas it's great to have celebrities speak out and they give their views, there's no substitute for you informing yourselves and getting good, reliable information so that you can make the best decision and help others as you make those very important phone calls. So thank you so much for fully engaging in our democratic experiment.
Thank you. We're going to take our next question that will come from Rhonda Reeves from Savannah, Georgia. Rhonda, are you on the line?
Yes, ma'am. I'm on the line. Hello.
Hi, Rhonda.
I wanted to know. Hi. My question is, I want to know what is working with justice reform and justice reform, because I'm a voter and I voted. I want to know about justice reform and healthcare. What is all of that going to combine down the line for the Black people and stuff?
Okay. So, how will voting for justice reform and health care impact our Black community? We can start with Dr. Cole, if you'd like to start on that one.
I'm really glad you presented that question, Sister Rhonda Reeves, because that's exactly what we're talking about tonight. What are the issues that you think are really important? Yes, personally, but also for our community and our country. We can even say for our world. And you've indicated two. One, some people say criminal justice, the rest of us say criminal justice reform, and then you said health care. And so let's tie this now directly to what Brother Dr. Vincent said. Take the time to read what do the two candidates and the vice presidential candidates say about these two issues. And then you're going to be easily directed as to how you vote. But I want to put in yet another word of support for something that we said earlier, and that is up and down that ballot, we've got to be informed about who stands on what position for what issues. It's not just the two presidential candidates and the vice presidential candidates. Think how all of the other folk on that ballot have something to do with our basic health care, our employment, our housing, our education, and yes, criminal justice reform. So if you have not done so far, reach out to these organizations, NCNW, the Urban League, the NAACP, to guide you, if you wish, to information that you can use in making your decision as to who to vote for.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Cole, for that response, and I think it's spot on. So we appreciate that insight and the question coming in from our caller tonight as well. We're going to go to another live question from the audience. We're going to go to Mr. Joseph Manley. Mr. Joseph Manley, we are unmuting your line. Mr. Manley, you can ask your question live on the call tonight.
Thank you for the opportunity to any distinguished panel that would desire to get a response. I'd be so honored to hear your response. My question is that I would like to know, in your opinion, how dire is the campaign of misinformation that's targeting Black and people of color, such as coming directly from the candidates, coming from the campaigns, factual information that's been put out that's actually not factual. I think the coin term is there are alternative facts, as well as social media. There are information is put out that's being wrapped up and presented as if though it's factually correct and officially coming from official sources. So if either the panelists would like to answer that question, I'd be so honored. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Manley, for that question. I think it's a great question. I'm going to turn to Dr. Vincent. What type of strategy does misinformation play in the role of voter suppression, particularly among the Black community? Would you like to tackle that question?
Absolutely, Brother Manley. Thank you so much for that question. And I just wanted to quickly just make an important point to amplify Dr. Cole's message. These advocacy organizations and these organizations that have supported and uplifted the Black community have stood the test of time. So many of these organizations are over a century old, and even in the face of systemic white domestic terrorism, these organizations have still stood to protect us and be our voice and to make sure that our interests are protected and represented. But to answer your question, there is good, reliable evidence to show that foreign countries are meddling in our elections. They are targeting the Black community and giving us information that's designed to sow discord and to pit one group against another. And so that is why it's so important that we cannot casually accept whatever we hear. I'm going to just quickly quote one of my dear friends who served in the previous administration, Dr. Ivory Tolson. He said you should be immediately suspicious anytime you get information that puts Black people, and particularly Black males, in a negative light. We always have to be suspicious of that, and whether it's out of context or just outright false, we always have to check, double check, and where appropriate, triple check to make sure that we are engaged in an activity. And just to address an earlier point, whereas at the national level we have attention, but down ballot, that Dr. Cole so eloquently said, is so critical. When we talk about criminal justice reform, your county or city district attorney has so much power in how your community is protected and policed. We saw that in Ferguson, Missouri, and now they have a Black district attorney for the first time because of voter advocacy. And so we have to pay attention to national issues, but so much of these things are at the local and at the regional level. So I just wanted to come back and address those 2 points.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vincent, for that. Really appreciate the insight, and thank you for the question that came in from the audience as well. I'm now going to turn it over to Dr. Abrams Mclean.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you for everyone who asked their questions tonight. We are now entering our lightning round of closing comments from our special guests, and I will first start with Dr. Gregory Vincent.
Very quickly, I just want to say that I love and I so appreciate Dr. Janetta Cole. I want to thank her for her lifetime of service. You have inspired so many, including me and my family. I shared with you the story of my Spelman daughter and how you inspired her. We love you. Thank you. We love our community, and we will continue to work. And never forget, young people, you are empowered. You don't have to wait for permission to serve, to lead, and to advocate.
And I want to say, I'll say amen to that, and a women too. It's been an honor and a joy to be in this convening under the sponsorship of Fair Count. You know, sisters and brothers across the country, when Carolyn and Robert Abrams brought their daughters and 2 sons into the world, there were some mighty acts. And 2 of their daughters are now so deeply involved in our social justice movement. Spelman alumna Stacey Abrams, when she was robbed of the governorship of Georgia, she didn't just sit down and moan. She helped to organize Fair Fight, to fight voter suppression, and Fair Count, to work for a fair census. Excuse me. So, where are we now? Where we are now, and Stacey Abrams would say it, and Dr. Janine Abrams, Stacey's sister, Mclean would say it. We are at that critical moment. You know, not every single Black person is a praying soul. Dr. Maya Angelou used to say there's probably 3 Black atheists somewhere. But you know, there's an African proverb that says pray with your feet. If there was ever a time for us to, of course, pray for the justice we deserve, it is now. But we got to pray with our feet, and those feet have to take us, righteous souls, to the polls. Thank you, Fair Count, for this very special evening.
Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
so
Cole,
much.
and thank you, Dr. Vincent.
Thank you so much to both of our guests. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and dialogue tonight. We'd like to close out with just a few reminders. If you have not voted yet, please make a plan to vote. You can do that tonight. Figure out where you're going to vote, how you're going to vote, when you're going to do it. And you can find out more information about voting at faircount.org/vote or by visiting vote.org. And then I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Abrams Mclean to close us out tonight. But again, thank you, and I've enjoyed tonight's dialogue.
Thank you, Brother Ed.
Thank you. I have definitely enjoyed tonight's conversation. And again, special thanks to Dr. Gregory Vincent and to Dr. Janetta Cole for joining us tonight and for imparting such wisdom all night. And as Ed said, if you haven't made a plan to vote, please do so now. If you wait a second at the very end of this call, you will be able to leave a message detailing why voting is so important to you. Remember, let's be seen and heard in 2020. Again, on behalf of Fair Count and our special guests, thank you for joining tonight's call. Have a wonderful night. Thank you.